Hello, I'm Erica Wortherly. I'm a licensed clinical social worker here in Jacksonville, Florida, former school teacher, and so glad to be able to share with you today some information that may be a little bit heavy, but definitely need to know regarding the students that we work with and also the peers that we work with. The thing is, we never quite know what people are experiencing or what they've experienced in their past, how it relates to their health, mental health, the level of empathy, and how they can relate to others. So what I want to talk to you about today is what is known as the pair of aces. I'm not talking about a card game, poker, spades, whatever, whatever you would assign ACEs to. We're not talking about that specifically, but ACE is actually an acronym. The first ACE is adverse childhood experiences. Some may have heard of this, some may have not. But there was a study done many years ago where there was a lot of people that were having issues with obesity, and they discovered that there was a lot of commonalities among the people who were participants in the studies related to their childhood and what it did to their bodies over time. So what happened is they basically came up with this questionnaire based on some of the history of the people that participated in the study, and they were able to use it and replicate it among other people in the area. Well, what's now known as the ACE study has been used widely across the world when it comes to assessing people for mental health challenges, and determining how it affects their bodies, how it affects their minds, how it affects social interactions with others. So what I want to talk to you today is the pair of ACEs. So I mentioned this first ACE, which is related to adverse experiences in your childhood. It's adverse childhood experiences. The second ACE is adverse community environment. Many of us don't have any control over the environment we have, and certainly many of our students that we work with do not have control over their environment. And looking at how that, in fact, impacts someone's mental health and emotional well-being. Also impacts their level of physical safety, level of trust, things of that nature. So I think it's really important to have these conversations when we are educators and we spend the majority of our time working with the youth of our communities and helping not only have the dialogue among each other, but also being able to explain to our students and explain to our families what the experiences are and how they can impact in the long term, how they can really have a great or grave impact in the long term. So today we're going to talk about increasing your understanding of adverse childhood experiences and adverse community environments and how that impacts us in the classroom, in our schools, in our neighborhoods, and our community. We're also going to talk about becoming more informed about what are our basic human needs. Some people may have heard of Maslow and his hierarchy of needs. So we'll touch a little bit on that just to make sure that you have an understanding, and then also use an acronym to help you be able to remember those things that are basic necessities that we have as human beings. And lastly, we'll talk about determining ways to increase the level of empathy that we have within the learning environment for not only for our students and for our colleagues, but also for yourself. So the pair of ACEs. Again, ACE is a questionnaire that was developed many years ago. They were able to narrow it down to 10 yes or no questions. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put the questions up on the screen, and I want you to read through those questions. They're simple yes and no questions. So all you have to do is read the question fully, and then for every answer yes, then you give yourself a point. Every answer no, it's simply 0. But for every answer yes, you're giving yourself 1 point. I'll be right back. It has been determined if you have 4 or more, then you're 2.2 times higher risk of heart disease, 7.4 times higher risk of alcoholism, 3.9 times higher risk of lung disease, and 4.6 times higher risk for depression. Those are not easy numbers. Doesn't say that those will ever develop in you. It's just saying that there's a higher risk. And I think it's important to really understand that as we are educators and setting an example for the students that we work with, we want to be able to address and cope with whatever challenges may have occurred in your own childhood in order to understand where one of your students is coming from. A lot of times what we make the mistake of doing as educators is focusing on the behavior of the students without actually taking the time to determine the why or the precedent to the behavior. It's not always an attitude problem. It's not always a level of disrespect. It's not always what their parents did or didn't teach them. Sometimes there's something a lot deeper. There's some things that the parents may not have known. There's some things that the parents may have experienced and they don't know better. But we are in a unique position as educators to be able to provide information or at least guide parents and fellow colleagues in a direction to obtain the information that they need to get the help that they need and be able to work as a team and work collaboratively to ensure the success of our students. We've heard of postpartum depression, which has an effect on the way that a child ultimately develops and the important part of getting that attachment to their mother. Some child miss out on that immediate nurturing, whatever the cause, whatever the reason may be. Then there's also emotional or sexual abuse that may have occurred in someone's childhood. Substance abuse, domestic violence, witnessing domestic violence. When I was younger, I volunteered in Hubbard House and the children's area. And one of the kind of frightening things was hearing children wake up in the middle of a nap screaming at the top of their lungs because that's how they were used to waking up because of the noise and So we've heard of We've all heard of post-traumatic stress syndrome. It doesn't just apply to soldiers. Think about our young children. Think about yourself when you were a young child. It may not have been you, but maybe some of your friends that had experienced something that you couldn't have imagined going through. Consider this. There are things that our children have gone through that we as adults could not imagine going through. There was a particular time that I worked with a young boy. He was in kindergarten. He was only 5 years old. He was diagnosed with ADHD, which a lot of our young kids are, especially our little boys, because they can't sit still, they don't pay attention, things of that nature. But this particular little boy was referred to me for counseling. And he was comfortable with me. He was sitting on the floor playing, and he said, just matter-of-factly, my dad went to jail this morning. And I sat next to him and I replied, really? Can you tell me more about that? And he was like, yeah, he was fighting my mom. And I said, oh, okay. Well, what were you doing while your dad was fighting your mom? He said, I was watching TV with my brother, eating my breakfast. And I said, did you all do anything when that happened? He said, no. But when the police came, then we just went to our room and waited for the police to leave. This was before school. So in my mind, I'm thinking, this is a child who was very much used to chaos in his household. So when he comes to school, what happens when you ask him to sit still and sit up straight in his desk and sit in the line and follow the rules? It's too much structure. So he's going to bring the chaos because that's what he's used to in his home environment. It's those types of situations that we have to consider when we're working with our students. I had another young lady that I worked with. She was very reluctant at first to talk to me, but over time I was able to find out a little bit more about her. She was 2 years over age. She was removed from her mother. Her mother was incarcerated. She constantly disrupted class. She was either getting put out of class or running out of class. Every time I saw her, she was in school suspension. Before she was referred to me, or before I actually got a chance to work with her, I had to get permission, get form signed from a parent. By the time I was able to get the referral, the appropriate referral, her mom was incarcerated. I didn't know who she was staying with. Finally got the information from the grandmother who she was staying with. Well, it turns out that this young little girl in the second grade, 9 years old, had not only witnessed domestic violence, not only witnessed community violence, but she had also been sexually abused. That has a heavy effect on a young child. That's not an experience I've had, but I know that there are people out there who have had that experience, even as a teenager or an adult. So imagine being 4, 5, 6 years old, then nobody talks to you about it. Nobody helps you process it. Nobody helps you understand what you're feeling, what you're experiencing. Everything you do just looked at as attention-seeking behavior. It's not always just attention-seeking behavior, just to get the attention. It is to get attention, but it's for attention in order to heal. And it's hard to recognize that sometimes, but that's why I'm going through this. I want you to be able to see and understand some of the scenarios that our students are in are things that we cannot imagine, and we need to be able to advocate for them. We need to be able to show empathy for them, and we need to be able to direct them toward resources. If these are things that have happened to you when you were younger, if you have not already sought some type of counseling, therapy, or received support from your social group, from your family, I highly recommend you do so. I was doing this workshop and went through the questionnaire with a group of a group of teachers before school started a couple of years ago. And I told them when they went through the questionnaire, you do not have to share your numbers. This is for your information. It's not for anyone else's. But I just want you to be able to see and recognize where some of your own personal challenges have come from. And I had one teacher who really did want to speak out and say, this is why I had a heart attack when I was only 38 years old. 38. She shared her score. Her score was 8 out of 10. She had a very tumultuous childhood based on this particular assessment. And she processed it to a certain extent, but she did not process it to fully understand what she had experienced in her upbringing. She just knew that she wanted to be able to help protect and educate children when she became old enough. And that's what she did. And that was her why for entering into education. But she also stated that she would seek some additional help to be able to understand what exactly she experienced and make sure that she is healing properly. With that being said, I really want to kind of shift gears a little bit, because there's a lot of times in certain communities where a lot of these experiences are not discussed at all. It's what happens in your house stays in your house. It's nobody's business. Or you may have told somebody what have happened, whether it's in your home, in your neighborhood, in your church, and it's dismissed. And then you're dealing with anxiety and depression. You've had suicidal thoughts. You have all these different health conditions, and a lot of them can be related to holding in pain. The pain is coming from those needs that weren't met, or those things that were put on you as a young child that you were not yet big enough nor mature enough to carry. So it's really important to not only look at your students through a lens of where is this behavior coming from, but also look in the mirror and say, did I have everything that I needed when I grew up? And if I didn't, am I making sure that my needs are getting met now? So I want to talk a little bit about some of the categories with the questions for the adverse childhood experiences. So there was abuse, there was neglect, and then household dysfunction. We have a lot of that happening, and it didn't help a lot of households when we had to end the school year, in person teaching early this year. There were several of our students, and we'll probably never know exactly the number, that were quite frankly traumatized by having to stay home. We don't know what the environment was like for them. We don't know what their family dynamics necessarily were. So as they return to school, whether that's online or in person, need to be a bit cognizant of where our children are mentally and emotionally as it relates to being away from school so long. So I also want to talk about what's called adverse community environments. Again, right now, even just this year, a lot of this has come to light. I'm thoroughly convinced that as we have slowed a lot of things down with the pandemic and COVID-19, that a lot of other things are coming to light. Not that they haven't already existed, but becoming even more obvious to those, because we are not so busy that we can actually take the time and take some things in. So understanding levels of poverty, understanding discrimination, community disruption, lack of opportunity and economic mobility, social capital. These are all those things that we may not always look at directly, but now we've kind of had an opportunity to actually look down and think about what we can do differently, whether it's in our school or in our neighborhood. How can we be a part of all of that? What is it that we can do differently to be able to help those that are not in the ideal situations? And by ideal, that's going to be different for everybody. I'm not talking about necessarily, okay, you have to live in a middle-class neighborhood and live with a two-parent household. There are two-parent households where there's domestic violence. So that's not what I'm talking about, but ideal for the nurturing and care for our students. Some of the results of some of the challenges that we have as it relates to these adverse experiences are lack of physical activity. A lot of times that's associated with depression. Smoking, picking up other habits that are not necessarily helpful for our physical body. So smoking, alcoholism, drug use, missed work is another behavior that's associated with these adverse experiences, and not even necessarily having a specific reason for for not being at work, but it could be that you really genuinely need a mental health day. You need a chance to unplug. You need a chance to process what may be on your mind. It may be that whatever the work you're doing is becoming overwhelming, or maybe you have too much on your plate and need to let something go. Sometimes that too much on your plate is not always activity. It could be your own thoughts. It could be your own emotions that you need to kind of sort out over time. Physical and mental health are impacted by these adversities. So a lot of times severe obesity is the result, diabetes, again, depression, suicide attempts. I've heard news stories where educators have attempted suicide. The number of children that are attempting and completing suicide has increased over time. A lot of people have various reasons for considering why that is the case for the children specifically. Sometimes people base it on technology, being able to have access to technology, social media and things like that, but without actually knowing specifically that child and what was going on with that child, we can never really answer that question. Unfortunately, that's one of the challenges of suicide. Having sexual promiscuity, whether that's, among the students, you may have children like the young lady that I spoke about earlier, where part of the reason she finally ended up on my caseload was because she was caught on video with a boy from her class, and they were huddled up in the corner kissing and grinding on each other. Well, obviously that's not ideal behavior for a second grader, but that's learned behavior. They both learned it from somewhere, whether it was taught from watching TV, whether it was taught from observing in person, whatever the case may be, it's behavior that was learned. And our kids are so exposed to sexual activity, whether it's on the internet, on TV, whatever the case may be, we need to be mindful of what the children are exposed to and not immediately going to punish them for whatever behavior they're displaying, especially if it's something that we don't agree with or that's not something my child would do. Well, we need to be mindful of what this child has observed when they're exhibiting those signs. Other effects of these adverse experiences, especially as you become an adult, are heart disease, cancer, having a stroke. Even brittle bones is considered one of the high number of probabilities when you have a high ACE score, whether that is your childhood experiences or that is something that occurs within your environment. I'm not sure how many people have heard this news story, but it occurred in Florida last December. There was a young man, I believe he was a senior, 17 years old, and he died by suicide by stepping in front of a train. Stories like that are absolutely heartbreaking. But what was even more heartbreaking is his mother's response. She went on Facebook Live and she was able to articulate what led up to her son's suicide. As a mother of three, my children are 23, 24, 25. As a mother of three, I could never imagine. I've always heard the greatest tragedy is for a child to die before a parent. But I think that this particular story captures everything that I've covered so far in this course, The Pair of Aces. Because she is able to explain their situation as a family. She was able to explain details in the days and hours that led up to her son stepping in front of that train. And through tears, she was able to put it out for everybody to know exactly what happened. And I see it as a cry for help. Now, I haven't done any follow-up to find out exactly what kind of help she was able to get. But a lot of the things, like I said, were covered. She was dealing with her own mental illness. They were having issues with housing. They were not able to, she was not able to always provide food. They were staying in a hotel. They lived a lot of time in their car. These are challenges. She talked about some of the things that he mentioned to her that just kind of sound crazy to her in those days leading up. She talked about conversations that he had with his father. But it's still, at some point, the question can be asked, and I think in every situation this happened, what could we have done differently? He played sports. He had already been accepted into college. So people saw him. They saw him as a young man. So I'm always wondering what could have been done differently in this particular situation. I've attached the link to this picture. You may be able to look it up, the title of the article, so you can look it up. But I think it takes a look. Obviously, there would be a trigger warning for some because you may not be able to handle it. Some people may have family members or friends that may have died by suicide. And so this can definitely be a challenge, but it kind of shows how all of these different elements just collide and end someone's life too soon. So I mentioned earlier, we talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's really no secret. The beginning of it is just that basic needs, having housing, having food, having something to drink, those basic physical needs. There's an acronym that I learned several years ago when I was teaching parenting classes, and I use it for everything because in my opinion, it doesn't just apply to parenting. So the acronym is the word SPICES. The S stands for social. We need to be connected. That is how we are wired as people. We need to be connected to others. The P is physical. So that involves not just your body, but making sure those physical needs are met. So getting regular exercise, making sure that you're eating properly and consistently, making sure that you're staying hydrated. If you have medical conditions, making sure those medical conditions are being taken care of appropriately by a physician. Then there's also the intellectual needs. We should all be learning. That's why we're here. We are here to learn more. Everybody should be learning. I get excited when I learn something simple. It could be a new word. It could be whatever. I get excited about learning something different, but that is actually a need that we have. Then there's also creativity. What can you do that brings you fun, joy, peace, allows your imagination to just run? So it doesn't always have to be necessarily art, like painting, drawing, singing, which it could be, writing, but it could also be if you enjoy landscaping, gardening. It could be culinary arts, those that like to cook. That's using your creative brain. It could be hobbies, jewelry making, things like that. Then the E is emotional needs. We have emotional needs. It kind of goes along with the social, but we need to make sure that we are naming and acknowledging our emotions and not just pushing them aside. So what that means is you can't just walk around every single day and say, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good, because there's some days that you're not. Let me say that again. There's some days that you're not okay. And it's okay to acknowledge that. You don't have to broadcast it to the world. I am not okay today. If you want to, that's fine. But you have to be able to name and acknowledge your own emotions so that you can be the best version of yourself as you step in front of our students who need you. Then there are spiritual needs. And I like to put the caveat in there. This doesn't necessarily mean religion. It's understanding that you are a part of something greater than you are, no matter what your beliefs are. So it could be a part of your school, being a part of your community, being a part of your church family, being a part of your organization, and being able to make a difference in whatever position that you are in. Being connected. It could be being connected to the earth. One of my favorite practices of self-care is going to the beach and just feeling connected to the sand and connected to the water, connected to the sun, something greater than you. Those are our basic needs. And if you want to kind of give yourself a check from day to day, go through that checklist. Say, did my social needs get met today? Or did I spend all day by myself and not talk to anyone? Are my physical needs being met? If I'm taking medication, am I taking it the way I'm supposed to? If I believe I should be in therapy, I probably should be in therapy. Getting those, you got taking care of your mind is also taking care of your body. A lot of people don't make that connection. They try to fix what they feel physically, not understanding that sometimes it's connected to what they're experiencing mentally and emotionally. People with anxiety, sometimes a panic attack can feel like a heart attack. Those anxiety attacks cause your entire body to affect your ability to breathe, ability to digest food. So you got to make sure that all of those different things are met. Mental health includes your brain health. Physical health includes your brain health. One of the things I think a lot of people have a difficult time with is the fact that when it comes to mental health, since they can't see it, they don't necessarily know what to do about it. The best thing to do about it is talk about it. Learn something new every day. Take care of your intellectual needs. Get creative. Whatever that looks like for you, get creative. Emotional health, make sure that you're naming and acknowledging your emotions and doing what you got to do to keep them in a balance. And then spiritually, make sure that you're connected to something that brings you closer to gets you more in touch with who you are as a person. There's 2 great books that I highly recommend, especially when it relates to being trauma informed and being trauma sensitive. The first is called The Deepest Well. It's by Dr. Nadine Burke Harris. And then the second one is called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. I don't want to get too deep into them, but they are excellent resources to help understand what a child is impacted by when they're young affects them when they are older. Both excellent authors and provide really insightful perspective on being trauma informed and trauma sensitive. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to your students. Understand where they may be coming from and how it's impacting how they show up for you. Don't take everything that they do or say personally. Keep in mind that some of their experiences have had a negative effect on how they can relate to you. There's a lot of people that are impacted as far as their trust or level of trust when it comes to adults, when it comes to their peers based on whatever experiences they've had, how many times they've been let down. It just depends. And we got to meet them where they are. Part of meeting them where they are is building that relationship, getting to know them. So I want you to walk away with two things. Be aware of where your students are coming from. Be aware of where you are coming from. And then you and your peers and your students can meet. You can't play this tug of war because somebody's going to feel the need to win. It's not a game. It's not a game to win. We're not playing cards. We're not, trying to pair of aces has nothing to do with cards. It's not a game. It's about understanding. It's about showing a level of empathy and a level of love, a level of respect for those that you're serving. So again, my name is Erica Nicole Wortherly. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I have a business called Teaching with Mental Health in Mind, where I provide mental health education for educators. And I also have a group called Teach Whole, where we discuss things a little bit more personally and intimately, case by case, whatever person may be experiencing. I provide advice. I am also a clinician in private practice here in Jacksonville, and I do counseling specifically for educators, but mostly for adults that are in some type of life transition. If you need to reach me, you can go to my website. It's ericainwortherly.com. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. You can find me there with either my name, Erica N. Wortherly, or Teaching with Mental Health in Mind. I hope that this session was beneficial for you. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you.